everybody. Raul here with Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist, composer, producer, vocalist, Michael Olatuja.
Hey, Raul, how you doing?
Doing great, doing great. Well, very excited to chat with you. You've got a new release, Legos Pepper Soup, and we're definitely going to talk about that a little bit, but as always, we'd like to know a little about you. How did you get started in music and on bass particularly?
So I was born in London, and around 1984, I moved to Nigeria with my parents. In Lagos, in the 80s, my mother, Raul Amador, who the album is actually dedicated to, she was a businesswoman and a chef. And so she had two restaurants in Lagos. She would cook things like jollof rice, egusi, eba, all these traditional, famous African dishes, especially pepper soup. That's why the album is called Lagos Pepper Soup. Also, why this is very important is because it was around that time in the late 80s when we were actually living in the restaurant that I got into music, because my brother and I started playing the drums in the Nigerian church.
Okay.
So that's how I got into music.
And then how did you move over to bass? Did they just need somebody to play bass because they had so many drummers, or what?
Well, I always say that the bass chose me, and the reason why I say that is we moved back to London, mm-hmm. and we attended the same Nigerian church, but in London. And I was the bass player's understudy. After a while, the bass player left, and since I was the next one in place, I kind of took over. So it was almost as if the opportunity opened up, and I just kind of slot right in. So that's how I ended up playing bass. I always say the bass chose me.
There you go. Well, and are you self-taught, or did you pursue studies once the bass chose you?
Yes.
How did you learn more?
Well, what happens was that in London we have what we call secondary school. Mm-hmm. So in secondary school, you go to secondary school between, let's say, 10 and 16. And so whilst that happened, whilst I was in secondary school, I played in the Nigerian church. But also I studied classical trumpet and that kind of stuff. They have a grade system in the UK, grade 1 to 8. And then I ended up doing the grade 5 trumpet. I studied music in secondary school, but also I decided to pursue it in terms of further education. Mm-hmm. So I did my undergraduate degree at London's Middlesex University.
And you are one of the rare individuals that is well-versed both on upright and electric.
Yes, that is correct. It's funny because I've been playing the electric bass since the age of 13. Mm-hmm. As I said, I went to Middlesex University. It was there that I got into upright bass, simply because I love the sound of the instrument. I was already transcribing my heroes, people like Ron Carter and so on. And it just seemed to be the natural progression of things.
Well, it is a special skill because a lot of players will kind of gravitate more towards one or the other. And there's just a handful of people like Patitucci or Stanley Clarke or people that are so well versed on both instruments that's a great skill. But also, you're in the New York area currently, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's correct. I'm based in New York, Brooklyn, New York.
And so many players in New York City need to have the ability to go on either instrument because it allows you so many more opportunities. If you get a Broadway show or anything, when Broadway's open,
yes,
they many times require that you can play both upright and electric because that's what the book calls for.
Yes, you're right. Well, once again, I initially started it because I absolutely idolized John Patitucci. I've met him several times since moving to New York. But when I was a teenager, he was the man. I had pictures of him on the wall. I used to play the 6-string TRB, Yamaha TRB bass like he did. And so in my mind, because John Patitucci played upright bass as well, it was a natural progression. It was only later that I realized that it made business sense.
Yes.
It made good business sense, to play both. And you know what? I've been very fortunate because I feel like both instruments have opened doors for me.
I want to get back to talking about Legos Pepper Soup. Now I know why it's named what it's named, but it's a dozen tracks, so 12 tracks there.
That's correct.
Are they your original compositions?
Most of them are my original compositions.
Okay.
So prior to Lagos Pepper Soup, I recorded 2 albums. One called Speak, and the other one called The Promise.
Okay.
And with Lagos Pepper Soup, I wanted to open it up and take some compositions from some of the artists that played on the recording. I composed most of the music on Lagos Pepper Soup, but I took a few pieces from people like Lionel Loweke, people like Robert Mitchell, and just to kind of spice it up a bit, to kind of add to the mix of the pepper soup.
Well, and I always find fascinating the musical differences when it comes to world music, the slightly different points of view, whether with West African players, when I listen to like Etienne Mbappé or Richard Bona, the choices as bass players that you make musically are exquisite, and they're very different than, for example, somebody out of the Middle East would make if they're using the Arabic scale and they're playing instead of octaves, 24 note in the same frame or something. But also the percussive elements and the rhythmic is so exquisite. And so you've combined what is described as an Afrobeat kind of element with a little bit of jazz in this mix.
Yeah, combined it. I like to call it cinematic Afrobeat. the blending of the Hollywood cinematic sound with Afrobeat. And going back to what you're saying about people like Richard and Bona, who's my teacher actually, and Etienne Beppe, who gave me a lesson as well. Growing up, I would go and see them when they came to London. And the reason why they're both important to me is because they mixed their heritage with jazz.
Exactly.
So that percussive element that you're talking about, they mixed it with jazz standards and they brought it into the music. They mixed it to the compositions. And I would definitely say I'm influenced by seeing them blending their heritage and jazz together.
Nice. And you've done such a lovely job at blending an orchestral element, because you've got a full string section. I mean, there's harp, but by the same token, there's electric guitar. And again, I'm hearing on some of these percussive, almost Latin jazzy, which I'm sure that comes from the Afro-Antillian pieces that I used to hear in the Caribbean. They came from Africa. So, but to me, I identify them as Latin, but probably very much of African origin.
Yes. We come from the same place. A lot of it came from Africa, and then the rhythm, and of course, it kind of spread out. And that's why when I listen to the Latin stuff or the salsa and that kind of stuff, it reminds me of home.
Well, and the end result, you've got it's got a very refined feel, but by the same token, it's very danceable and very energetic. So, sometimes when people put in strings or something, they're kind of going a little more the smooth jazz, let me calm you down. You have it all blended up, so people need to move around as they listen to this. I mean, it makes you really want to get up and dance, although I do not have a good dance skill, but I'm inspired.
Speaking of getting up and dance, well, that's how we grew up. I mean, when we grew up, we would go to like many Nigerian parties and would see people dancing to these African styles, like not only Afrobeat, like high life, wara, Fuji, these styles that really like make people move on the dance floor. And so when I was composing my music, it only felt natural to have those elements there. As far as the strings are concerned, it was a natural progression, because when I moved to New York, I got into playing on Broadway. And so I ended up playing on The Color Purple on Broadway, which won a Grammy and a Tony. I ended up subbing on shows like The Lion King and Wicked. But the latest show that I played on was Disney's Frozen on Broadway. And why that's important is because hearing the orchestra every night, that really got to me. And I also made friends with the top orchestrator on Frozen, but also one of the top orchestrators for Disney movies, and his name is David Metzger. And so I asked him to orchestrate a song on my track, on my album, and he did. And I asked some other top Broadway composers like Joseph Joubert and Jason Michael Webb. So when I approached them, they understood, and I let them know it was an Afrobeat thing, and I wanted it to sound like the movies. And so that's how the kind of string thing happened.
Very nice.
Basically hearing it every night at Frozen. And a lot of the string players are on Broadway. Those are my colleagues. So it was just a matter of asking my friends to come and join me for my recording, and they said yes. So we had a lot of fun.
That is great. And it is so many times when you're in the right place at the right time and you can make these acquaintances.
Yes.
And you just really never know. I just interviewed another bassist whose interview I won't mention because it's going to be a surprise for people.
Ooh.
But he just completed a CD with a friend of his. They've known each other 50 years. They've been playing together for half a century. And those kind of friendships that you make early on, you never know. I mean, it kind of comes back to you always want to be on your best behavior because these are people you may need or you may work with later on.
Yeah, honestly, it's just an extension of their relationship. When I started Frozen, I'd already started recording my album, and it wasn't necessarily the plan to have strings on it. But as time went on, I would hang out with these string players, and I'll kind of put feelers out there, and I'll say things like, listen, I'm going to do an album. I'm doing my album, but if I need strings, would you be interested? And the response from all of them was basically a unanimous yes. And I could sense the enthusiasm. Yeah, it's just more of an extension of the relationship. And likewise, when they call me, I show up to their things and do what I can within my power to serve their vision, to serve their songs, to take the project on the next level. So it's a bit of a give and take. And I guess it's all relationship once again.
Absolutely. And I've been containing myself, but as I look off to your side and I see your Sadowski bass, I need to talk about how you get your sound. What gear are you using? Obviously, a Sadowski to start out with, so we can start with that.
Ooh, yes. So, Sadowski, this is the Sadowski NYC. I've also got another Sadowski Metro. Sadowski is one of my good friends. He's been good to me over many years. Basically, I fell in love with his basses whilst I played at the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir. Now, that's a famous Brooklyn choir that have like 6 Grammys. They're just very well known in that world. So I spent like 8 years playing with them and recording some of their albums. And I just discovered this Sadowski bass whilst I was there. And I loved it because it not only worked well with the gospel stuff, it worked amazingly well with the gospel, the jazz, and the musical theatre. So I needed one axe.
Yes.
That could really cover me in different genres and in different situations. And I feel like Sadowski did that well.
And that explains the 5-string, because a lot of the Broadway books call for 5-string. You can't go with just 4.
Yeah, a lot of them call for, I mean, the ones I've done anyway, Lion King, Wicked, and Frozen, and some of them, I have to play different basses. For instance, on Frozen, I had the 5-string Sadowski, I had a 5-string fretless, and I also had an upright bass. Mm-hmm. So often you're doubling on different instruments. So it's definitely useful to have a 5-string.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and not to mention the fact that I believe it was the tour with Hamilton, and he'd had to modify his upright with the extension to go low C.
The low C. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, it's whatever the book is asking for, you have to be prepared to deliver.
Yeah. You have to be prepared. Yeah. I was very fortunate at Frozen because David Metzger and the people that were the composers and the supervisors, the music was there, but they really wanted me to add my own personality into it.
Nice.
And to be honest, they gave me freedom, and they trusted me that I would, serve the narrative. And it's funny because they actually gave me a bass solo.
Nice.
On Disney's Frozen. It was the first time I got a bass solo on Broadway. But that's how it works. That was a lot of fun.
And tell us more about your sound chain. What else are you go from your Sadowski, you have a choice in amplification? Yeah,
so I usually use Aguilar amps. I use maybe like a 4x10, 2 4x10s, and a 750 head. And the reason why I like that is I find that the Aguilars really work well for upright and electric. And I discovered it a couple of years ago, well, over 10 years ago when I used to play with Terence Blanchard, the famous trumpet player. We would do a lot of kind of orchestral gigs, but we'd also do a lot of jazz gigs. And, I needed one amp that could work for both genres. And I just fell in love with the Aguilar sound on both instruments. Mm-hmm. So I use the Aguilar. And I also use some pedals. I use the Line 6. It's very simple old pedal. Mm-hmm. The Line 6 M9, the Line 6 M5. I use the Aguilar Octava and the Aguilar filter. Sometimes I use the freeze. It just kind of depends on what I'm doing. But I've got like a few pedals that I kind of like to play with.
And do you have a choice in strings?
I like to use Sadowski strings.
Good.
Yeah, I have used others, but I've settled on Sadowski strings, simply because I think it works well with the bass. Mm-hmm. And it's turned out to be my sound, and it served me well.
Got you. Now, there's always one element in the sound chain that a lot of bassists tend to kind of not think as much about, and that is instrument cable coming from your bass to your amplifier. Do you have a particular preference?
Not really, but what I like to do is I like to make sure that the cable that goes into my bass is L-shaped, simply because on a lot of my gigs, I move around, I dance around, or if I'm on Broadway, then you often have quick changes.
Yes.
Where you have to kind of, it's almost like choreography. So you don't want the cables kind of sticking out of the instrument to kind of, to hit something and then crackle or something during the show. I mean, I just like to have a solid cable as long as it's L-shaped that goes into the instrument. And another thing, in terms of equipment, when I record in the studio, my favorite thing to do is put my the Sadowski bass through the Avalon 737. And I love the Avalon preamp because it works amazingly well for both bass and vocals.
As we look ahead, I know as we do these chats, we're in the pandemic, and a lot of people's plans have kind of gone on hold because Broadway is dark, tour dates are canceled, all of this. But what are your thoughts for the future? What do you think? What's next?
Well, you're absolutely right. Actually, the show that I was on, Frozen on Broadway, that closed. Disney's Frozen closed a few months ago, and the touring that I did with Angelique got postponed to 2021, and some of my own gigs actually got cancelled for this year. So in terms of what's next, it's really about 2021 to be honest, in terms of gigging and getting out there and connecting with the people in that sense. Of course, when that time comes, I'm going to resume touring with Angelique and continue with my own music. But until then, it's about taking each day at a time. One is basically staying healthy as much as possible, staying safe during this pandemic because our health comes first. And also trying to stay positive and creative during this time. So yes, we can't tour, we can't travel like we used to, but what can we do? Things like reading books, things like exercising, things like composing. So just trying to find creative ways to get through this very tough situation.
Gotcha. And I'm glad you mentioned Angelique because it was something I want to do a quick U-turn back to Legos Pepper Soup. You brought in an amazing collection of vocalists on different checks. Angelique is one of them.
Yes. When I started recording, so first of all, the album took 5 years to make.
Oh, wow.
It took 5 years to make. I went in there with a core team of the rhythm section and some people like Lionel Lueke, Joe Lovano, Aaron Parks, Terry Ngali, Camille Thurman, and Samir Zarif. So I went there with just a core unit. So it wasn't my intention to record like an epic album with loads of guests, however, that just happened over time. As I end up touring with more people and building relationships, I would say, "Are you interested in singing on a song?" And a lot of them just kept on saying yes. So before I knew it, it just ended up to be like a kind of stellar, all-star lineup. So that's how that happened.
Well, and I'm sure even linguistically, because I don't understand the language with the vocals. You need somebody that can sing in the language that you need, right? So that narrows it down as well.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Angelique, Angelique just speaks many languages. She speaks like Fon, the language, one of the languages in Benin. She speaks another language in Benin called Mina. She speaks French. She speaks English. She also speaks Yoruba. So
Wow.
with her, we can speak together in Yoruba. So that was, kind of straightforward linguistically. With someone like Diane Reeves, she doesn't necessarily speak Yoruba, but she loves languages. She loves, and she took it on as a challenge, and let me just say, she came to the studio prepared, and she sang like never before. She sang like there was no tomorrow. So much so that she left myself and the engineer with goosebumps.
Wow.
So concerning the language, that's kind of how that played out. Many people don't speak Yoruba, but they're willing to learn, and they have a lot of enthusiasm.
Well, I for one am very grateful that you have shared your music with, especially during the pandemic, because it is very uplifting to hear this creative effort. And for those of us that are not able to go out as much as we used to, or anything like that, hearing this, it's very exciting, and it just is a reminder that no matter what happens, music is a force that will never go away. It's an essential part of humanity. It's universal, whether it is in Africa, whether it is in Native America, wherever it is, but it will endure in spite of all the things that will happen. And it may be one of our lifelines, one of the things that we can hold on to emotionally to stay mentally healthy by hearing this kind of creative energy and happiness. I mean, it's just fabulous. So if people want to know more and they want to listen to this music, because I know they're going to want to, where's the best place to look?
So you can find this music on all online stores, iTunes, Spotify, just the whole gamut. If you want to buy the record and the CD, you can get it on Bandcamp. And people can also stay in touch with what's going on my Instagram, Michael Olatuja. And my Facebook, Michael Olatuja and Lagos Pepper Soup.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And you do have a website as well, michaelolatujumusic.com.
That's correct, michaelolatujumusic.com. That's my website.
Well, fabulous stuff. Michael, we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule and setting up to invite us into your home where you are. People, you've seen him here. Michael Olatuja coming to you live on Bass Musician Magazine.
Woo! Thanks so much for having me. It was definitely a pleasure.
Thank you.